There we go. George, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. And I'm George Carrico. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the director of the West Virginia Brownfields Assistance Center here at Marshall University. And Carrie and I have had the pleasure of working all over the state for a number of years now, doing all kinds of things related to the brownfields world. Our agenda for today, we got a lot to cover, and so we'll get started on this real quick. First, we'll have Joe Novak. Joe, thanks for all your help. Joe's with our EPA Region 3 Brownfields program. He'll be going over a very detailed overview of this whole grant process. If you're new to these, this will overwhelm you, but hang in there. And if you've done this before, this will be a good review session for you. After that, Carrie will be leading a discussion on SAM.gov and grants.gov, which is always an important thing we need to take care of. And after that, I'll be going through a few things about how our brownfield centers are here to help you, and some resources that we can provide. And you probably didn't know this, but you're also going to be getting some homework today. So a little homework slide. So stay tuned for that. And then, as Carrie said, we'll have time at the end for some questions, some Q&A, and some closing remarks there. So again, if you got a question, use the chat box, etc., and let's have a good session here this morning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Novak. Joe is with EPA Region 3 Brownfields program, and he's a great asset to West Virginia, and we really enjoy working with him. So Joe, you take it away, please.
Thanks, George. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. If you haven't already heard, EPA is currently in the process of awarding almost $3 million in brownfields funding to 7 West Virginia communities overall. This funding will bring the total level of brownfields funding in West Virginia to close to $30 million. More than ever, local governments and communities need support from the federal government. By selecting these communities and others across the nation to receive brownfield grants, EPA is making investments in communities and promoting an opportunity to attract jobs as well as contribute to broader economic development concerns while taking advantage of the existing infrastructure and capacity. With those funds, West Virginia communities have assessed 325 sites, cleaned up 22 sites, leveraged over $1.65 billion in other public and private funding for redevelopment, and leveraged almost 5,400 jobs. The Brownfields public-private partnership model makes sites ready for development. Partnerships between the neighborhood, local developers, and the government can give the surrounding community the resources it needs to flourish. A property that was once an eyesore turns into an asset, and that's what the Brownfield program achieves. Next. Grants awarded by EPA's Brownfield program provide communities across the country with an opportunity to transform contaminated sites into community assets. Brownfield projects clean up contamination, reuse existing infrastructure, and make way for new infrastructure, and provide economic opportunity for residents impacted by contaminated and abandoned properties in their neighborhoods. They provide spaces for business growth and job creation, and they remove blight and improve community health and appearance. The resulting community economic and environmental transformation leads to increases in local tax revenue and has been shown to increase residential property values in nearby neighborhoods. Next. Based on grant recipient reporting, grantees have leveraged on average $20 for each EPA Brownfields grant dollar expended on assessment, cleanup, and revolving loan fund cooperative agreements. Next. In addition, grant recipients have leveraged 10 jobs per $100,000 of EPA Brownfield grant funds expended under cooperative agreements. The total jobs leverage is over 170,000 jobs. Next. An academic peer-reviewed study has found that residential properties near brownfield sites increased in value by 5 to 15% because of cleanup activities. Next. Finally, analyzing data near 48 brownfields, EPA found an estimated $29 million to $97 million in additional tax revenue for local governments in a single year after cleanup, 2 to 7 times more than the $12.4 million EPA contributed to the cleanup of those brownfield sites. Next. Who's eligible to apply for brownfield grants? State, local, and tribal governments, general purpose units of local government, regional council, planning and redevelopment agencies, quasi-governmental agencies, and nonprofit organizations. Next. Assessment grants provide funding to inventory, prioritize, and assess sites contaminated or potentially contaminated with hazardous or petroleum substances, conduct redevelopment planning, conduct community involvement, and facilitate area-wide planning efforts. They advance local cleanup and redevelopment planning centered around the brownfields impacted area, site-specific cleanup or reuse plans. They develop an area-wide plan or other planning activities and identify next steps and resources needed to implement the plan. Travel and training to West Virginia state conferences or EPA national conferences. The grants are generally a 3-year time period. Next. As far as funding, a typical grant application can request up to $300,000 to assess community-wide properties contaminated by hazardous substances or petroleum contamination. The maximum amount to expend in assessment funds at any site is $200,000. So if you're assessing only one site, what we refer to as a site-specific proposal, then the grant amount is $200,000, but you may seek a waiver up to $350,000 for a site that may be heavily contaminated. It's important to note that funds cannot be used at another site when you're applying for site-specific. Finally, EPA offers up to $600,000 for an assessment coalition, which is 3 or more eligible entities, including the recipient. In this case, we're looking to see if the other coalition members lack the funds or ability to do this work on their own. Next. Cleanup grants provide funding for cleanup activities at a single or multiple sites. Allowable costs include program reporting, cleanup oversight, and environmental monitoring. A redevelopment or reuse plan centered around the brownfields impacted area is also an option. The criteria also requires that sampling activities have been addressed at the site and that cleanup alternatives with cost estimates be provided at the time of application. So it's important to note, applicants must own the property at the time of application and demonstrate you are not liable for contamination at the site. Funding up to $500,000 per grant. You can apply for multiple sites per grant. However, only a total of $500,000 is a maximum. These grants require a 20% cost share and typically also have a 3-year time period. Next. This year, we're offering RLFs, revolving loan fund grants. These grants provide funding to capitalize a revolving loan fund that provides loans and subgrants to carry out cleanups of brownfield sites. 2 important criteria your organization needs to address is cleanup oversight, where you indicate if the loan or subgrant recipients will be required to enroll in the West Virginia Voluntary Remediation Program, or if enrollment isn't required, describe how you will provide or acquire the necessary technical expertise to conduct and oversee the cleanup. The second criteria is whether your organization has the legal authority to manage an RLF. An applicant will need to provide info from counsel about your legal authority to access sites and hold funds, make loan payments, accept payments, etc. So funding is up to $1 million per eligible entities. Funds may be used to address properties contaminated with either hazardous or petroleum for cleanup and planning efforts. These also require a 20% cost share. Because these grants can be complex and take time to develop, these grants are awarded with a 5-year initial grant period. Next. As I mentioned, planning activities are also an eligible cost under all of our grant options for sites or areas that fit the brownfield description. EPA allows our core grants to assist your communities to perform the research needed to develop plans for assessment, cleanup, and reuse. The plans listed here are only provide direction for future brownfields cleanup and reuse, but protection of human health and environment, improving economic viability, and providing you the ability to reflect the community's vision for the area. So there's a link provided below which will provide more detailed information on each of the efforts listed here. Next. The brownfield process utilizes 4 main types of grants. Assessment and cleanup are the primary tools, and RLF and multi-purpose are smaller in terms of overall funds awarded or are offered in alternating years for RLF and multi-purpose. As an FYI, job training grants are also offered, but are separate from this process and also awarded separately, so they're not included here. A typical flow of events is shown in a chart with assessment and multi-purpose grants identifying sites. Along with targeted brownfield assessments, these grants fund phase 1 site assessments or all appropriate inquiries, which research past events at sites which could have left potential concerns for contamination. This is also a good time to consider the West Virginia Voluntary Remediation Program and the benefits your project could obtain, such as a certificate of completion for your site, which will make it more marketable for prospective purchasers. The phase 2 site assessment performs site sampling to determine if there are any contaminant concerns and help delineate the extent so that costs to remediate could be estimated. Site vision and reuse plans are important to start early in the process to determine the level of cleanup required. So residential and recreational standards would require a higher level of cleanup than perhaps a commercial or industrial reuse, depending on what's discovered. These plans can also be started much sooner in the process as well and updated as more information about the sites is revealed. Cleanup costs could dictate what the future reuse could be. An APCA, or Analysis of Brownfield Cleanup Alternatives, provides cleanup options and their respective costs. This document is required prior to initiating a cleanup so that the total cost of the cleanup, including any future leveraged amounts, can be identified. All of the various grants can perform this effort. Site cleanups can be accomplished with cleanup, multi-purpose, and RLF grants. This year, the multi-purpose is not being offered, but RLF grants are, as they alternate in the years available. Finally, the goal is to redevelop and hopefully your community's vision for the site. If you notice, the left sidebar denotes that community involvement is a critical factor throughout the redevelopment process. Next. This chart provides a more visual comparison and summary between the 3 grant types being offered this year. It could be helpful in discussions with your community when proposing your plans, listing grant activities, applicant eligibility, as well as what each will achieve. Under assessment, you might select one of the 3. You must select one of the 3 grants listed below and follow the request for application guidelines that will be issued later this year. You can apply for assessment and cleanup grants in the same year. If you're reapplying for additional assessment funds, any current assessment grant funds need to be drawn down by 70% by the date listed in the announcement. Next. This slide lists the 4 major sections which comprise a brownfield grant application. In project area and revitalization plans, you're going to discuss your community and target area, the brownfield issues and their impacts on the community, how this grant fits into the community's revitalization plan, the anticipated outcomes, and how the target area will benefit from revitalizing the brownfield sites, and the strategy to leverage resources to reuse the brownfield sites. In community need and engagement, you're going to discuss why your small or low-income community is unable to fund brownfield activities, how this grant will help populations in the target area that have a high incidence of adverse health conditions or greater than normal incidence of diseases, how this grant will help populations in the target area that have a higher burden of environmental justice, how community partners will be involved, and finally, the plan for communicating project progress and results. The July 13th webinar will go into more detail in these two sections. Under tasks and approach to work, you will discuss your step-by-step plan for implementing the Brownfields project in the target area, what tasks need to be accomplished and when, who's involved and who's the lead in implementing those tasks, how funding will be budgeted to pay for those tasks, and how you came up with those numbers. How you track the project to make sure it stays on schedule, on budget, and will accomplish the goals within the grant period. Your strategy on the timing and schedule for leveraging other critical funding to the overall vision. In programmatic capability and performance, you're going to demonstrate your ability to successfully manage the grant and produce the measurable results discussed in your proposal, describe your organizational structure, and finally, highlight past performance on either past brownfield grants or federal or non-federal grants. The August 10th webinar will go into more detail on these last two sections. Next. Grant applications that are in alignment with comprehensive master community plans and reuse objectives stand a greater chance of scoring higher and thus receive funding. So now's a good time to identify existing plans, ensure your project goals are consistent with those plans, and that those plans support your wider vision. Next. When requesting funding, a strong grant application provides a brownfield inventory which justifies the reason for requesting funds and forms the basis for the major sections of that application. Engaging the community as well as local and state representatives to develop consensus and support is important early in the process. Documenting what you currently know about the status, past history, and concerns about each property based on past use makes it easier to tell your story and helps prioritize your approach. Next. When identifying target areas for your application, identify those areas geographically as clusters of brownfield sites in close proximity or perhaps along a corridor or downtown area. Mention the adverse challenges these areas present and your goals and plans for them. It's also important to identify any existing or planned investments that have or will be made and how your grant will supplement those investments and be a vital aspect to overcoming your challenges and achieving your redevelopment success. Next. Finally, an important aspect to getting started early is to prioritize your site inventory based on the criteria important to your organization, community, and all the project partners involved. Having developer interest is often important from the beginning, but sometimes it may not develop until more information is known about the contamination at the site or cleanup itself is attained. Is the community firm or flexible in supporting your redevelopment goals? These are just some of the criteria you can consider in focusing your priorities. Next. Okay, one question everyone asks is when will the requests for applications be posted? They are currently undergoing some minor edits based on last year's comments before being routed for approval and announcement. At this point, we are not anticipating any major edits to the application. That's why it's a good time to get started early because there's a lot of information to research to make your application competitive. You can get a copy of last year's solicitation at epa.gov/brownfields under the FY21 closed solicitations link. The grant announcement will likely occur sometime in August or September, and with a 2-month advertisement period, close in October or November. So EPA hopes to complete the process before the National Brownfield Conference in Oklahoma City, which is set for December 8th through the 11th. So does anyone have any additional questions?
Thanks,
Okay, and
John.
for,
Go ahead.
And I guess just for first-time applicants, starting on the work presented in today's sessions is going to make the next two sessions this summer more meaningful. So hope to see you guys in July or August, for more in-depth details on your application. So if there's no other questions, thanks.
Great. I don't see any other questions right now. Oh, here we go. What types of properties would this apply to? Melissa, do you want to unmute and clarify your question a little bit?
Would it apply to assessment or cleanups? Basically, brownfield sites are contaminated or potentially contaminated sites. So almost any property can be viewed as a brownfield site, and it's eligible for assessments. Now for cleanup grants, you've got to have, as that flow chart showed, you kind of have to have done some of your homework prior. So the site would have needed to be assessed, contamination identified and quantified, some cleanup alternatives looked at, in a bigger, vision and picture presented.
What about ownership requirements for all three kinds of grants?
For assessment grants, you as a grantee are not required to own a property. For RLF grants, it's not required either because you're providing sub-grants or loans to eligible entities who can perform the cleanup work. For cleanup grants, you are the applicant and you must own that property, prior to the time the application, is due.
Great. Thanks for that question, Melissa. Any other questions?
Carrie, if I could just add regarding assessment grants, the big thing is you've got to have the current owner approval, site access to be on that site to do that work. So that's a hang up you run into once in a while. But you just need to make sure that the current property owner is on board with the planned assessment work on that property.
A great point. All right. If there's no other questions for Joe right now, we're going to move into the next section, but feel free to keep dropping those questions in, even if you're not sure who they might be for, and we will check back in as we go. All right. Oh, something happened in your slides got in here twice, Joe. Question in the chat while I get to the right place. How many applicants were there last year in relationship to what was funded? Sort of what's the success rate?
Yeah, I think overall nationwide, the success rate is about 33% or so.
Great. We do tend to have a higher success rate in West Virginia than the national average. So I think part of that is because folks get started early through this great help we get from EPA, and the centers are here to help you get started and increase your chances as much as we can. George, did I cut you off?
I was just going to ask Joe, is that both assessment and cleanup grants, all of them combined is about 1 out of 3 or so, or 30%?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So it is down to the fraction of a point every year. So these are very competitive for sure. All right, but before you can write your perfect grant submission, you have to make sure that you have everything in line on all of the online submission portals and subsequent and related registrations. And so I want to talk a little bit about grants.gov and sam.gov. So all grants must be submitted through grants.gov, which is the federal clearinghouse for funding opportunities. But before you can even apply on grants.gov, you have to have a DUNS number and a SAM registration. And we, every year, George and I have interacted with issues with really great proposals that get to the last minute, and then there's some issue with their sam.gov or grants.gov registration. And at that point, these registrations take sometimes weeks. And so if you get to the last minute and it's not all lined up, then there's nothing we can do. So we want to make sure that you guys are thinking about this early, and we can start making sure that all the registration is in line, and that is something that we can help you with. So we'll talk about it a little bit today, and then we'll follow up with you on this topic in particular for sure. So the first thing you need to do is get a DUNS number, and you can register for that at this website. Some of this is going to change in the future, but for this round of grants, you still will need a DUNS number to do your SAM registration and get a grants.gov account. It requires your tax identification number from the IRS, some other organizational information, and 2 forms of documentation, and you'll get a DUNS number within 1 to 2 business days, according to their estimates. So you probably have this already as an organization. The people that you might check with to make sure and get that are your organization's leadership. If you're at a city or a county, you could check with your county clerk, your city clerk, or your city manager. You can also look it up, and we'll share that link for how to look it up in the follow-up to the webinar. So once you have your DUNS number, you can register for at SAM.gov. It's an official website of the US government. There is no cost to use SAM. There are a lot of sort of services and websites out there that will offer to help you with your registration for a fee. Those are not necessary. You can use the site for free, and if you need help using it, you can ask the Brownfield Centers to help you for free as well. So there's definitely no need to pay a fee related to this. This is where you register to do business with the government. You can update or renew your entity registration, check the status of your entity registration, and then search to see what the current status is. And one of the things that our staff is going to do as follow-up to this is check registration for eligible entities that are signed up, and we'll be in touch with you just to give you that information and help you walk through it if there are any issues. So again, you may already have this if your organization has ever applied for federal funding, not just EPA funding, but any federal funding in the past. You may have already taken care of this and have an account and a number. And again, the people you might check with are your leadership, your city or county clerk, a city manager, or if you have a grant writer or a grant manager on your staff. A lot of times what we run into with issues related to this is that the person who sort of held this information or knew all of this login information has moved on to another organization, and the transition things got lost, which is common and happens all the time. So that's another reason why you want to make sure you check this early, so that if that's an issue, we can try to track down and get into those accounts even without that person being with your organization anymore. So when you go to sam.gov to apply, they did just completely revamp their website, which I learned, and it's, in my opinion, a little harder to navigate than it was before. So if you have run into issues related to that, again, we can help you muddle through. But you will need your DUNS number that we talked about before, your tax identification number, your bank information, and then there's a requirement for a notarized letter for any non-federal entities. Once you have done your sam.gov, you must renew it every 12 months, and it has to be active when you're applying for the grant. So you want to make sure that all of your information is up to date and that you are getting the right information, and that even if your registration is active today, it will still be active past the point of the grant or anticipated grant deadline. So even if it looks good right now, and if we think the grants are going to be due in November, you want to go ahead and make sure that you're all set so that if it expires between now and November, you don't run into an issue. And again, it is completely free to register and renew. If you get emails or ads when you're on the website about fees to help you do this, those are usually scams and you don't need to do them. You can do it completely on your own. It's not an especially difficult process. It just takes some time, and it can be difficult, like I said, if you've had some turnover and you're not sure who the right contact is. And so that's why we ask that, or encourage you to take care of it early, because the registration process is not immediate. Once you register, it takes a few weeks to actually get an account set up. And then once you have that account, you can do a grants.gov registration, which allows you to actually submit the grant application package. So grants.gov, you will go and register for an account there. And these are just some screenshots and some materials provided by grants.gov about how to register. Anyone can just register right now, but in order to apply, you need to associate your profile with an organization, and the eBiz point of contact, or POC, is who assigns roles to your profile. Again, this can be where it's unclear who your eBiz point of contact is based on turnover, or if you haven't applied for a grant in a while, and we can help you try to figure that out or track it down if it's not immediately obvious, to make sure that whoever is the lead for this grant application in particular has the ability to actually submit the application on the day that is complete. So each organization has one eBiz point of contact, and that is assigned in sam.gov. And then that eBiz point of contact assigns roles. Someone with an authorized organization representative or AOR role can submit applications, and you can have many users with that ability throughout your organization. Someone with a workspace manager role can create workspaces and can work on the grant, but can't actually submit it themselves. All right. So I see we had a question about applications come in while I was talking, so we'll ask that. And then if you have any questions about the grants.gov or sam.gov process, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. So Mark Stott is asking if there are errors or omissions in the application, is it automatically rejected, or is the applicant given the opportunity to correct or clarify? I think that's for you, Joe. You're muted.
We usually encourage people to send in their application a few days at least prior to the deadline in case there are issues that might need to be resolved. So it's difficult to say if you're right at the deadline and you're applying and you run into an issue. The best thing to do is take a screenshot, capture whatever you can as a backup, send your application to Jerry Minor Gordon, at EPA, and copy me as well, so we have a record of it. So in case you do have a legitimate issue and it wasn't your fault, then we could use this email as a timestamp submission. But other than that, sometimes these errors that occur within grants.gov and sam.gov, can't be fixed by EPA because they're run by a different agency. So that's why it's important to get registered early, know your passwords, make sure your dates don't expire so that you're, limiting the issues that you could run into when submitting.
Thank you. Great. I don't see any other questions. So George, it's on to you.
All right, thank you, Carrie. I'll just add a comment regarding the sam.gov and grants.gov. If you're a consultant and you're working with a particular entity or whatever, get with them now and check and see where they stand on that. You might say, well, that's not our problem. Well, if you're trying to help them, it is. So Carrie and I see this every year. At least, one good application can't get submitted because of this hurdle here. So take the time to look into that. All right, we want to just spend a few minutes now talking about our brownfield centers and how we can help you. We have been doing this since officially 2005. 2006 is when we really got started. That's when the legislation was passed to establish these brownfield centers. So we've been doing this for quite a while now. And of course, I'm at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, and Carrie is in Morgantown at West Virginia University. So together we work all over the state. Don't worry about the map there. We don't pay much attention to that. We work all over wherever we need to. We're obviously here to help you. But what are some of the things we can do? And here's just a few of them we wanted to make sure we mention to you today. We realize everybody on the call here, you may be at square one, step one on your project, and some of you may be well down the road on a brownfield project. Sometimes they get stalled, or sometimes it's hard to just get them started. So we can sometimes help you with, what is the first step or the next step that maybe you need to be looking at, and try to help you to take those steps. And it's already been brought up about site inventories for assessment grants. If you haven't started that, we'd highly encourage you to get started on what kind of sites are in your community, in your area. And it is going to be very simple, a simple Excel spreadsheet to get you started. But also always want to make sure we say, if you've got a site inventory, keep it up to date. Sites come and go with time. And we can help you with some of that in terms of some site mapping and related aspects as well. Community engagement. We want to. You're going to hear this a lot with my comments here today. EPA wants to see a lot of real, honest community engagement and facilitation. uh, uh, in both their assessment and cleanup grants. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But this is a huge part of this. And it's, as Carrie already mentioned, these grants are so competitive. You can't just write an application and get a average score on it. It won't be funded. You've got to write, we used to tell everybody you've got to write an A paper to get funded. That's not even true anymore. You've got to come pretty close to writing an A+ paper. A low A paper probably won't get funded. It's that competitive. And community engagement is a part where we see a lot of problems. So we can help you with that, to find those community partners and get that community engagement piece going. So we're here to help you with trying to get that going. Now, says grant research, writing, review, and editing. I wish we would have put writing in really small letters. We don't want to sit down your grant. We are here to help you to write sections of it, to help you with research, put your grants together, reviewing those applications and doing editing work and so forth. But we can't put that flavor to those grants that you can in your local community, but we're here to help you with all that. Reuse planning. Joe had a slide there about some of the reuse planning options that can be included and that can be paid for with this funding. There's a lot of latitude there, actually, but sometimes, I mean, just last week we were with some folks on the site, and they have this great property and they have no reuse plans at all, and they're right now trying to figure out what can we best reuse this property for. So be thinking about what fits in your community, what doesn't fit in your community as well, and we can help you with some of those aspects as well. And the last one we wanted to bring up is environmental site assessment interpretation. Some of the consulting firms that are on here, you're used to writing up phase ones that follow the AAI guidance. You've done phase twos and corrective action plans, etc. But for a lot of folks that don't do this on a regular basis, it can be rather complicated as you start talking about, especially sites with multiple contaminants or multiple concerns. It can be kind of complicated. We're here to help you to understand those reports, what they mean. And also, I know at the end of our presentation today, we've got contacts listed, including Casey, Aaron, and Derek with our West Virginia DEP and their Office of Environmental Remediation. We work with them on a daily basis, and they're great assets and great resources. They can help us with that as well. But you want to make sure that the community and all those people involved understand what these environmental site assessment reports, what they mean, what they're about, and then to go from there. So those are some of the main things that we get involved with. So go to the next slide. As far as helping you with writing these applications, again, what Joe went through there is just the basics. There's a lot of detail here. I like to tell people it's 15 pages worth of data that you got to put into 10 pages. So there's a lot of work involved to put in a really good quality, high scoring application. So a few things to get started on now, if you haven't, is, well, what's your project all about? And Joe pointed out earlier, talking about your target area. I want to give you an example. This last go around for applications, the West Virginia Region 4 Plan Development Council, they received an assessment grant. Now they serve a 5-county area. And if they would have put that application and said, well, this is for our whole 5-county area, we're just going to look all over the place, that wouldn't have scored very well. You have to have, what's your target area? And for them, they actually are concentrating on, let's see, the Meadow River and the Greenbrier River watersheds. Now they can still use their funds outside of that area, but that's their target, and that's what their application was based around. So again, if you're in a county, you've got a particular corridor, or you're in a city, you've got a particular neighborhood or a particular area within your city, you need to define that target area. Community engagement, there it is again. Can't stress this enough. Who are the people in those communities in your target area that you need to be interacting with? And you need to start that now to get those partnerships in place. and get them involved with the process. Again, EPA wants to see that community engagement piece. And if you score low in that area of your application, you won't get funded. It's just that simple. We're here to try to help you with some of that work. Putting a good budget together. You can ask for $300,000, but if you put 280,000 of it into just one thing, that may look rather odd and probably won't look very good to EPA, and as a result, you probably won't get your funding. We're here to help you to how to put in a good quality budget that takes care of all the activities that you're wanting to do as part of your grant, and we'll try to help you with that. We do provide templates and example grant applications. I want to make this real clear. It's not me sending you an example grant that you cut and paste it and put your name on it. That won't work. It's to give you an idea of the types of information that EPA is looking for, and then gives you those examples that then you can specify to your community and to your specific situation. But again, we're here to help you with those aspects as well. Particularly for cleanup grants, a couple things we want to make sure to note here. And while this is our first webinar, we want to make sure we bring this up again. Joe's already brought it up a little bit, but for cleanup grants, we want to make sure that first you, the applicant, you're the owner and you're eligible for that cleanup grant. And is the site eligible for a cleanup grant? Was proper due diligence done prior to property transfer? Just about every year every year we run into this at least once, if not multiple times, of improper property transfer, and the property ends up not being eligible. We won't go into those details here today. We'll save that for later on, but we just want to make you aware of that right now, that is something that needs to be taken a look at. Here we go again, community engagement. A big part, as you've got your site identified, you've taken ownership, and now you're going to get into the cleanup process. The community needs to be informed, and they need to have to have a say in the whole process because it's in their community. Notice the cleanup grants also require public notice aspects as well. We can help you with that. There is a public notice that has to be sent out. There has to be a public meeting specifically for the project to review it, and then allow the community to provide comment and ask questions about the particular project. And again, we can help you with that. Joe brought up earlier the ABCA document, Analysis of Brownfields Cleanup Alternatives. Again, this goes through remediation options for a particular site, and it documents why your cleanup grant has chosen this one particular remediation option as the best alternative to clean up that site. EPA has a template that you can use. Also, we've got other ABCA examples that can help you, and we can help to get those put together for you. Last thing we wanted to bring up regarding cleanup grants, and Joe mentioned that there's a 20% match required on cleanup grants. Sometimes that, if you're asking for you've got a large cleanup and you're going to ask for $500,000, you've got to come up with $100,000 in match. Especially in our smaller communities and rural populations, that can be a pretty big hurdle there to try to get over. We can help you to try to identify those matching funds, whether it's state funds or in-kind or cash or private foundation funds, and even there are some other federal funds that actually at times can be utilized as well. So we're here to try to help you with that. So those are some of the things that our brownfield centers are trying to help with, and we've had really good success over the years, and we're happy to help you as well. So with that, we'll go to the next slide here. Carrie and I like to think positive about the work we're doing. So after you get your grant, and there's a lot of work there, but we're hopeful, and as she already pointed out, we bat a little better average than the national average when it comes to grants being funded. But after you get your project, Joe doesn't just write you a check for $300,000 and say, have fun and, let us know how it goes. They actually require some other things. First of all, you'll have to enter into a cooperative agreement with EPA. And that can be a little challenging for some folks and a little time consuming. We can help you with some aspects of that. You're going to be hiring environmental consultants or site redevelopment planners and folks, things like a structural engineer, maybe all kinds of different folks you might be needing to hire. We can help you with providing RFPs or RFQs to where you hire the firm that fits your project and fits you and your needs. We can help you with that as well. There it is again, community engagement. After you get your grant, that doesn't stop. That continues throughout the whole grant period and throughout your whole project. And we can help you to keep that aspect moving forward. There is reporting requirements. Quarterly reporting is required, and including your financial status and activities and tasks that have been completed or are being scheduled or whatever the case may be. And we can kind of help you to get that set up to where you get started off on the right foot with your reporting aspects. And then finally, we're here to help you with, we call it local brownfield efforts. Sometimes it's not just one brownfield, but it's 3 or 4 brownfields in a particular area. Or, and quite often, as is the case, this brownfield funding is really just a small piece of the site redevelopment puzzle. It's just one piece of that puzzle. There are many other parts that have to come into play as well. And we can play a role in helping to bring those other pieces into play. Many times, because this environmental stuff can be a little complicated, simply interacting with the public, with your community partners, et cetera, explaining why the cleanup is required, explaining why the particular remediation method has been selected, why it's being used. It goes back to that some of our original marching orders and when these brownfield centers were put together was to provide outreach and awareness and education about brownfields. So, we're here to help you to do that, to help explain folks, what's going on in their communities. So again, we like to think positive about that. After you get your grant, we continue to help you after you get your money and as your project continues. All right. So with that, we go to homework. Carrie and I haven't talked about it. We may require you to submit your homework before the next session. I don't know yet. But seriously, here's some things you need to be working on now. Again, if you're a consultant and you're working with a community, or if you're the community looking to submit an application, these are some of the things you need to be looking at. Right now, early on, as Joe said, the applications probably won't be due till October or November, but now's the time to get started on a lot of these pieces. It'll make it a lot easier for you as you get closer to that deadline for your application submittal. All right. Are you eligible for EPA brownfield grants? Just make sure you are. Again, as Joe pointed out, the guidance from last year is still available. You can look at it to get the details. And if you're still not sure, call Carrie or I. We're happy to help you with that. And then identify your project. Again, you might be at square one. You may be well on your way to on a particular project, but define it. What's the purpose of it, and what are you expecting as a result of this project? All those factors that you want to take a look at. If you are planning on an assessment grant application, have you started a site inventory? If not, it's something you really want to get started on now. I most of the time tell people I just call them sites of interest. You may not know anything about some sites. It may be a vacant lot that it's been sitting there for a long, long time, but it's right on a thoroughfare and it's got redevelopment potential. You may not know anything about it, but again, get started on that part. Put in all the information that you can about it, and then which ones really are on the top of your list. You've got a property owner that's willing and wants to donate a property or sell it for next to nothing, or it's that perfect location for the whatever that's needed in your community. So prioritizing that site inventory, keeping it up to date, all those factors, you need to be working on that. If you've got a site and you've got existing assessment reports already, you want to make sure that that your assessment reports meet the requirements. For phase ones, they've got to meet the all appropriate inquiry requirement. If you ask your consultant if it does and they say we don't know, we'll have to check, you probably need to fire them and hire someone who does know what that's all about. Most of our firms here throughout West Virginia understand this very well and can put together quality reports that meets those requirements. Redevelopment plans. Again, you might be just looking at potential, just site concept plans at this point that you're taking a look at. You really don't know what all is going to be potentially going on the site yet. Get started with something, or you've got some plans that are in progress. You might even have some plans that are close to being complete of what you want that site to be redeveloped into. And keep in mind those redevelopment plans can change as the project progresses. Particularly for cleanup grant applications, again, who owns the property? And, are you eligible for that grant, for that cleanup grant? And is the property eligible? Remember, as Joe said, applicant has to be the property owner. And again, every year we run into sites not being eligible due to some sort of issue related to the property transaction. Again, won't go into those details here, but if that's where we need to have one-on-one conversations with you to make sure that that site is eligible. Here we are again, community engagement. Go ahead and, if you haven't started, identify those community partners. Where are your brownfields at, and who are those local community partners that you can reach out to? Talk to them about potential plans, even if it's just preliminary things. Talk about what those communities need, etc. Get them involved now early. You'll be glad you did. For cleanup grants, one comment we want to make is make sure the environmental assessment work is complete enough to where you can apply for a cleanup grant. There may be a few small things that still need to be looked at, but you need to know how much asbestos is in that building that you want to remove, or how much lead paint needs to be abated in that building, or how much impacted soil needs to be excavated. What's the extent of the groundwater contamination there? Do you have all those factors? As an example, just 2-3 weeks ago, had an individual say, we have a property, we've got our assessment work done, and we're thinking maybe we could go for a cleanup grant. The phase 1 did not meet the AAI requirements, and the phase 2 work was very, very limited and just simply said there are some contaminants on the property. There's no extent defined or anything else. So there's no way you can take that and work it into a cleanup grant application because you don't know how big your problem is. So again, make sure the assessment work is complete to a point where you can apply for those cleanup grant funds. As Carrie went through, again, we want to note, make sure sam.gov and grants.gov, make sure that hurdle doesn't come back to trip you up a little bit later. Make sure you're up to date. And finally, we're here to help you. We have very limited resources. We have projects going on all over the place. So if you've got questions or you want our input, the sooner you get a hold of us, the sooner we can help you. If you wait till a couple of weeks before the applications are due and call Carrie and say, hey, we're thinking about maybe putting an application together, our response will be, that's great. Once we get through with this year's application, then we'll work with you for next year, because there's no way we can help you then. But we're here to help. And the sooner you get a hold of us, the sooner we can try to be of service to you. So with that, Carrie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, George. We did have a few questions that came in that I think we can field together, the three of us. But I also wanted to say, related to George's thoughts about what we can do if you win your grant, we also can help you if you do not win your grant. So there's things like a debrief from EPA that can be really helpful if you want to try to apply again. So if you did apply last year and did not receive a grant, I strongly urge you to consider reapplying. And one of the best tools for that is to talk with EPA about sort of how your grant scored, and I can help you arrange that. And we'll be following up with the folks who weren't awarded grants in the next couple of weeks.
That's a good point, Carrie, because as Joe said, if they're not going to change the guidance very much, you've probably got 80% of your application written. Now you just need to work on those sections that needed bulked up a little bit, so you'll score better next time.
For sure.
Great point.
So the first question, I did answer this in the chat, but there was a question about whether there are Brownfields Assistance Centers in Pennsylvania, and there are not centers that look like the ones in West Virginia, but there is a TAB provider, a technical assistance to brownfields communities provider that's funded by the EPA to provide assistance to communities in all of EPA Region 3. The current provider is NJIT TAB, who can help you, but also starting July 1, the Brownfields Assistance Center at WVU will be the TAB provider for Region 3 and be doing some work around grants in particular over the summer and into the grant season. And I put my email in the chat. If you have questions about that, if you're in a different state, please reach out to me and we can chat about the differences in art services versus the Brownfield service, the center's services. The next question from Mark Stott is, can matching funds come in the form of pro bono work from a for-profit entity? Joe, you want to take that one?
Well, costs that are eligible under the grant as cost share have to be eligible programmatic expenses under the grant, and it has to be done during the grant project period. So after you're awarded a grant, if you're awarded pre-award starting July 1st or normal that October 1st, that work has to be done during the grant period. If it's something like legal type work, I think we would want more information on what it is and why it was required as part of the cleanup grant and how it fits the model as an eligible expense. And some things like that, for instance, we might have to confer with our own attorneys or our headquarters office to determine whether that would be considered an eligible expense.
Along the same lines as eligible expenses, if you start your homework for your grant and spend a certain amount of money doing that, is it okay or allowable to get reimbursed for that money when you get the grant?
No, any work performed prior, to the project period is not an eligible expense. So it has to be done during the project period of the grant. And that includes cleanup work as well. So if you performed any cleanup work, asbestos cleanup, prior to, the grant officially starting, then it's not eligible because it wasn't done during the project period of the grant.
Thank you. Another Pennsylvania question. As a consultant, I work in many communities in PA. Where can I find a map of potential brownfield sites? And we happen to have a couple of folks from the PA DEP with us. So I am going to ask Kim Hoover if she can unmute and let us know that answer.
Sure. Can you hear me okay? This is Kim.
We can.
So we do not have a statewide inventory for brownfields. However, most of our county agencies, our planning authorities on the county level, and redevelopment authorities do have inventories that they keep up to date. So I would recommend that you kind of look on the local level and the county agency for where you're interested in, and also our regional offices may be able to assist you with that. So feel free to get in touch with me at khoover@pa.gov and I can help you further. Thanks.
And Kim, while we have you, there was a note that Pennsylvania has PTACs that can help. Can you tell us anything about that? Or maybe Gary, who commented on that, can share?
Technical assistance centers. Yes, I am not familiar with those. Maybe Gary can share on that.
Yeah, there's in the Pittsburgh area, we have CalU has a it's called procurement technical centers. I think that's what it's, something similar to that, where they can actually help. In Pittsburgh, we have the Southwest Regional um, Corporation or Commission that's actually funded through the state that provides free services, and then some of the I guess Slippery Rock has one. I'm on the western side, so Slippery Rock has one, Kellu has one, and then I think there's a couple other ones. But if you go to, I think it's, if you just do a search on PTAX, they have, you can get, they're all across the country.
Great. Thanks for that. All right. I don't see any other questions right now, but please continue to ask those questions. We have a couple more slides and then just some additional time for questions today. So just some upcoming opportunities to continue the discussion and education around these grants and other brownfield topics. This is part one of a 3-part webinar series around applying for EPA grants. So our next installment will be July 20th at 10 a.m. where we're going to really dive into the application itself. And Joe especially is going to go over the first half of the application and what reviewers are looking for and what kind of information you can start to pull now as you start to prepare your applications. And then we'll finish out the series on August 10th at 10 a.m. as well to look at the rest of the application packet and what all you need to sort of round it out. We'll do some interactive stuff in both of those sessions, look at some successful grant applications to see examples of good answers to the questions and discuss with you further about your projects. So I strongly encourage you, if you're even thinking about doing an application this year, to join us again on the 20th of July and the 10th of August. The good news is that if you're registered, you're already registered for all 3. And so you've already taken care of it. You can view all of the webinar information, including the links for the next 2. And if you give us a few days, the resources that we share with you today will be available at the online event page for the webinar series, which is linked here. And we'll send some reminder emails as we get closer to those July and August dates to make sure that you've got everything you need to log in again. Some other resources that are coming up, Joe mentioned the Environmental Workforce Development and Job Training Grant Program, and that this is another opportunity around brownfields that is separate from the solicitation that we're talking about today. Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything else about this.
These are very competitive. So I would say if anybody is interested in applying for one of these job training grants, to kind of contact us right away and we can kind of fill you in on what they're about and, you know, see if it's worth applying for, because we hate to see you apply and then just kind of get rejected. So for the most part, it's about 1 or 2 awards, you know, per region. So let us know, or I can refer you to our job training coordinator in EPA Region 3. It's Gianna Rosati, and she can kind of help us, you know, get you through this thing as well. But contact us before the solicitation comes out, because then we can help you a lot more.
Thank you. Great. These are just some additional resources on that Environmental Workforce Training Grant. And then we are excited that the Brownfields Conference and Main Street Training will be back in person this year. We'll be in Huntington on September 14th and 15th, and we've got 2 days of really great sessions, including some mobile workshops to sites that have received brownfield funding, some in-depth conversations with sites that have received funding. And then we also have, in the lead up to the conference, virtual sessions in August, which includes the last part of this webinar series, and some other sessions that have regional applicability to the Central Appalachian Brownfields Innovation Networks region, as well as state and federal updates from representatives at DEP and EPA. And so registration is not yet open for that, but will be open in the next week or so, and we'll be sure to get that information out to you guys as part of our mailing list. And then this is just the contact information for George, Joe, and I, who you heard from today, and then also contacts at DEP who can help you. There is a component of engaging DEP that we didn't talk about very much today, but that we'll talk more about in the coming sessions And that's another thing that the Brownfield Centers can help you with. And with that, we'll open it for any additional questions that have come up. Gary, it looked like maybe you had a question. Would you like to ask it aloud?
Yeah, because I can't type too fast.
That's fine.
Yeah. And I had to keep correcting misspelled word. No, I'm just teasing. So I'm doing some work throughout Appalachia. And so can your organization partner with more than one? I stepped out for a minute. I didn't know if you guys addressed that. Can your organization partner with more than one community for an application, especially like in, if I was to do some work in Pennsylvania, as well as work in West Virginia, if there was something in Kentucky? How is that, is that possible? If your name pops up a couple times?
Who wants to, gentlemen? I'll toss
Yeah,
it.
it's possible to, work with as many communities as you want. Only one of those communities is going to be the official applicant. And then the rest of the members would then be coalition members. So for instance, if you're applying for an assessment grant, it would be a coalition assessment grant, but only one of those would be the lead entity. Now, if the lead entity is from Kentucky, for instance, well, that's a different EPA region, and that would probably defer back to, that other region to run the grant, not region 3. So it depends where your application is typically coming from. So if your lead agency is located, whether it's in Pennsylvania or West Virginia, then our region would run the grant. But it's okay to go cross regions, cross states, whatever works for your project, to make it a sound and viable, project.
We've seen cross-state and cross-region coalition grants successful in West Virginia. There's a long-standing relationship with some counties in the Northern Panhandle and a county in Ohio that's had multiple coalition assessment grants. There's a newer coalition in the Northern Panhandle as well that's different counties in West Virginia and a different Ohio county. And recently there was a successful coalition grant with the 2 blue fields in Virginia and West Virginia. So there's definitely precedent for it, for sure. Any other questions? All right, well, we will be following up with everyone with the resources, including the recording and the slides from today, and some summaries of the questions and responses that we heard today as well. And those will be emailed to you and then available at that online event page that I mentioned before. And then we'll keep in touch with more information about the upcoming sessions. And that registration is still open. So if you have colleagues or partners or pals that you want to suggest should join us, please do. And we will keep that open basically until all of the sessions are done. I do see that someone has a hand raised. So if you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Patrick Johnson, and I'm representing
We're having issues hearing you. It's not just me.
Regional Development Service from Atlanta, Georgia. I was just asking if you apply for, can you hear me?
We're having trouble hearing you. There seems to be an issue with your audio.
Hello?
I would suggest maybe write us a question and we can respond that way.
Yeah, we're having trouble hearing you. So if you can type your question in the chat, or if you want to email it to us afterwards, we can follow up with you. Any other questions?
Okay, let me see. I'll be.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you think of something later, you can always email the folks on this slide and keep an eye out for something from the centers as follow-up. Oh, one more. Are there any recent great examples of awarded projects you can share? We will be sharing some of those as part of the next 2 phases, and those will be available on that online event page and to all of the recipients in our follow-up. So we'll share those soon. We're still sort of curating which ones we're going to use coming up, so we haven't identified those yet, but stay tuned and that will be available.
I would just add that you can go to the EPA Brownfields website and see which communities have been funded, past years and current.
Mhm.
So that's, if you just want to get an idea of who out there has been successful, maybe.
Yeah, the easiest way to find that is to Google EPA Brownfield grant fact sheets. Usually takes you right to the page where you can search that. That's how I always do it. I should probably bookmark that. But. All right. Thanks to everyone. We'll hang for a minute if there's anybody who wants to stick around with a question, but otherwise, we will pepper you with emails in the coming weeks.
And don't forget your homework.
Yeah, George is going to be grading it.